Okay. We bring in Nathan Kirschbaum of Kirschbaum, one of our gold sponsors. Going to take just 2 minutes here and go over a couple things. Hi, Nathan.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Good. Let me get my, so it says cannot share screen.
Oh, yep, I have to stop 1 second. You should be good.
All right, great.
All right, thanks.
Alrighty, 1 second here. Get this situated, kind of. There we go. All right. There we go. And share. All right, so you should be seeing my screen now.
Yep.
All right, awesome. Yeah, hey everybody. So I'm Nathan from Kirschbaum. It's great to be here again. This year we have a short message for you. You're about to see one of our senior developers. For those of you who don't know Zach, he's a lead developer on our team who specializes in wellness and the psychology of development. So here we go.
Oh, 1 second. I think you have to reshare with checking the sound.
All right, let me see. I thought I did that, but let's try again. Thank you for letting me know about that.
No problem.
Share. There we go. Okay, let's try this again. Okay. You seeing the right screen there?
Yep.
All right, let's go now.
There we go.
The world has changed quite a bit over the past few years. We here at Kirschbaum have been remote since the start. And whether you're new to the remote work scene or not, we'd like to offer you a warm welcome. Welcome. Now, we know some people have had a bit of trouble adjusting, and that's a normal part of the de-starching process. There may be some side effects, and that's okay. When you're a fully adjusted member of the remote community, you'll learn to embrace all the wonderful benefits that working from home can offer. As the resident health and wellness dude, I'd like to offer you 3 tips to help you along the way. First, remember to stay professional. Just because you're at home doesn't mean you can be a slob on camera. When in doubt, think 21st century mullet. Business on top, party on the bottom. Second, since you're nice and comfy on bottom, remember to move throughout the day. Take breaks often, aiming for at least a 5-minute break once an hour. Your mind, body, and health will thank you. Third, remember to stay flexible. You're at home and no one can see you when the camera's off, so make sure to take the time to do those embarrassing stretches. Like this one. Or this one. Or this one. We're glad that you're here, and know that you'll be a pro in no time, if you're not already. And whether you're new to the remote work scene or not safe for work. And whether
All right, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed making it. For anyone interested in working with the Zach and a bunch of other problem solvers who love to have fun, please do reach out. We are hiring. So enjoy the rest of your Laracon.
Awesome. That was great. I had not seen that. Really good job. Like the production value on here. It's getting high. All right. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, take care.
All right. definitely everybody check them out over on the Digital Swag page. Also, if you want to get in touch with them about doing work with them, or obviously if you're interested in working for them, check out their website. And yeah, they've been really great to work with as far as I'm concerned. Really great group of people there, so check them out. All right, 2 more talks. I'm gonna bring Caleb in now. Here he comes. There he is.
How's it going?
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. That was pretty awesome.
Yeah,
That
was
video.
great. That's great.
Thoroughly entertaining.
Yeah.
A little too many visuals at some points, but
Right. All right, man. Well, I'm gonna let you take it away.
all right. Let's do it. Sharing screen.
Yep, looks good.
Great. Here we go. Hello, everybody. Sup, Laracon. Thanks for having me back. I'm going to talk about Livewire, and actually not as much about Alpine. I realized that I'm a total fraud. I just remembered or saw that my talk title has Alpine in it. Not going to be much Alpine, but I'm coming at you with a bunch of cool Livewire. So yeah, Livewire and Alpine are my projects, our projects, the community. And they're going pretty well over the past few years. And these Laracons are kind of like benchmarks for me. Every time I do one of these talks, I kind of look up a bunch of the metrics and compare them. And yeah, we're, the curve is, we're on the up and up, very promising, big numbers. So first big number, 1.6 million installs for Livewire. I think that's pretty cool because 6 months ago at the last Laracon, I think it was like 300,000 or something, a measly 300,000. And we're up to 1,383 sponsors for Livewire, which is fantastic. It allows me to work on all this stuff full time and actually hire contractors to help me. So thank you so much. That's up from like 600 something last time. So growth, hashtag growth. And also stars, GitHub stars. What more valuable metric is there? 10,000 GitHub stars up from 5,000. So good stuff all around. Thank you all so much for caring about the projects and installing them and starring them on GitHub and sponsoring me on GitHub as well. So let's freaking do this thing. All right, today's talk, I've been coming at you with big stuff. So every Laracon that I've done has been, this is a really cool feature in Livewire, or this is how you can use Livewire in a big way to recreate Twitter, or, farm out like all of your front end and use it to do forms and real-time validation and data tables and all this stuff. And I thought, I think I want to dispel the myth that you need to like buy into Livewire in any big way. So I thought, why don't I do a talk where I show you all the small things instead of all the big things? So that's what we're going to do, is use Livewire in really small ways. And some of the inspiration from this talk for me came from using Transistor by my good friend, Justin Jackson. This is a great, fantastic app. If you're a podcaster, you should use it. And we use it for our podcast, No Plans to Merge. Shout out to No Plans to Merge on Fridays. We record, me and my buddy D. Cole. We have a great time. And actually, Daniel just quit his job, so he's looking for work, freelance work. He's charting out as a freelancer, so go hire him if you're looking for a great tall stack dev, Laravel dev. So No Plans to Merge. We use Transistor to host it, and every time I use this app, it just fills me with the warm and fuzzies because look at that. There's like an actual full page reload, but it's super fast, and everything is like mostly static with a few little whiz bangs and doodads. To me, it's like an ode to the way that I probably like to write apps best. A traditional Laravel app with blade and page views, full page loads, and then little bits of interactivity sprinkled in here and there. But for me, this really is a good example of an app this is like every app I've ever really worked on. You have data and stuff, you have more data and more stuff, and a bunch of form fields and buttons. Like what else is there to building applications than form fields, buttons, and data stuff? So looking at this, I started kind of poking around and being like, what are the parts of this that you couldn't just use plain HTML and CSS for? And that's when I started thinking like Livewire is actually a really good fit for those things. So I want to talk about those things. And another app that I think is a good example of this kind of thing is Laravel Forge. It's a bunch of forms and buttons and does some other, great stuff, but but that's really the bulk of it. But there are a few places where you need that good interactivity. Let me move my face down here. Yeah, and in those places, what are you going to do? You can't use HTML and CSS to get a deploy button to actually, I'm actually deploying the Livewire site, and that's not necessarily meant to be a stunt, but I guess it is now a stunt. But yeah, you hit that deploy button, it's all live and reactive. You can't just do that with HTML and CSS. There's some reactivity going on there. So we're going to work on our own version of Forge called Laravel Frog. It's brand new. It doesn't have all the features of Forge yet, but it's got a bunch of them. And this is going to be our muse for this talk, where we're going to go through this very static app that has no interactivity at all, just a bunch of page loads, buttons, data stuff, a form or two. And we're going to soup it up with Livewire. Before we jump into the code, let me give you a tour of the 4 stops we're going to make on this journey. There's going to be 4 basically areas of this app that are too staticky, and we need to make live with Livewire. So I'm going to walk you through them. The first one, when we go to add a server, you type in the server name, you select a language for the server, and now you want to select a framework, but you have this big wad of frameworks. They're not sorted by the language that you selected, which is no bueno. And this list could be absolutely massive. So we're going to use Livewire to pare it down so that when you select one of these, the next list, it's a chain select. The next list is contextual. It's filtered by whatever you selected before it. So we'll get to that. And then after we do that, there's this restart button for restarting a server. Right now it's a form submission, so there's no like user feedback or anything. It's just this full page load. And we want something a little bit more whiz-bangy and doodaddy than that. So we're going to hit that restart button with Livewire. And then inside of the server page, we have our server analytics. Clearly, this website is extremely popular. We're looking at 3 visits today. Just kidding, it's dummy data. It would be through the roof. All right, so this is a bunch of data that we loaded from a database. Notice when I load this page, if I refresh this page, it takes like a full second, which is super duper long. If I refresh this page, it's instant. So I basically faked a really expensive database query to generate this data. Because when I've generated charts in the past for like admin panels, I go crazy with Eloquent and I slow down all these pages. So we're going to talk about how we can use Livewire to defer the loading of this chart till after the page loads. Something you can't just do with HTML and CSS. And then this deploy button. This is literally like the most popular UI thing on Forge, I guarantee. I have no idea, but for me, like if you use Forge, this is the button you're constantly using. So I figured, let's make a deploy button. But the deploy button is going to have a little bit more behind the scenes, and we're going to see how we can use Livewire in when you're performing bigger actions like deployment, where you're queuing a job and it might take 5 minutes or something like that. Okay, so that's the tour. Let's get started. The first place we're going to start is this create server page, and we're going to do the select drop-down stuff. So here we go. We're going into the code. I assure you it's pretty straightforward. This entire app doesn't have Livewire yet. It's just a bunch of routes. So here's that create server route, server/create, and then return view create server. So very straightforward, totally vanilla. First step, let's go into create server. Check it out. Okay, here's that blade file. Very simple. The only thing about this that's not ridiculously simple is X layout. If you're not familiar with blade components, go get familiar because they're totally awesome and I'm going to use them. But if you don't know about blade components, pretend this is just a magic HTML element. You don't really have to worry too much about it. And then on this page, we have a form tag where you're submitting this whole form. We have a text input. We have a select input for all the languages where we're looping through a bunch of languages from the database, just using Eloquent. And then this framework list where we're looping through all the frameworks from the database, and then our create server button. So it's pretty straightforward. This is where we're going to start. But before we start, we need to actually install Livewire. So this is my favorite Laracon stunt. I think I've done it every time, and I will never pass up an opportunity. Oh, I have a dangling earpiece thing. Okay, it was going to kill me. I know it was killing you. So we're going to install Livewire because I never pass up an opportunity to show you how stupid easy and fast it is to install Livewire. So check it out. Here it goes. It's a 2-step process. First step, composer, require Livewire/Livewire. You hit enter and you do it. I already did it, but you composer, require Livewire, and that's the first step. And the second step is just include the assets, the front end assets that it needs. So we're going to go into our layout.blade.php, and we're going to add Livewire CSS, Livewire styles, and then down here, we're going to add Livewire scripts. And that's going to load Livewire's JavaScripts. So that's it. Big reminder to everybody, that's all you need to get started with Livewire, nothing more. That's totally it. So now that we have Livewire installed, let's extract these static parts of the page into a Livewire component and make them dynamic. Great. So the first thing I want to note is like, what are we going to put inside the component? Are we going to put this entire page inside of the component? And I actually want to not do that. I want to like really demonstrate that we're using Livewire in small ways right now. I'm not going to use Livewire for this form. I'm going to leave the form the way it is. We're just going to take these two inputs and put them inside a Livewire component. The browser's not going to know the difference. It's still going to be a form submission. We're just going to make these dynamic with Livewire. So let's do that. Let's create a Livewire component. So Livewire, that's the syntax for creating a Livewire component, just kind of like X hyphen, but Livewire colon. And we're going to call this language. What are we going to call this? Something really long and nasty. Server, language, and frameworks, fields. There we go. That's long and nasty enough. And let's actually create that component in our app. So to do that, artisan make Livewire, server language and frameworks fields, and hit enter. Great. So that created for us two files. The class, that's the class portion of a Livewire component where everything starts. It's just a class that extends component, this Livewire component, and then has a render method that returns a blade view. Cool. So let's take a look at that blade view as well. Server, language, and frameworks blade. And that's it right there. Okay. Let's actually sub this out with hello world. Or no. That's so not cool. Hello Laracon. Refresh. And now we have hello Laracon spat out on the page. Nothing dynamic about this. We haven't added any Livewire. It's basically like a blade include or a vanilla blade component. So let's take this bit of HTML and let's pop it into our Livewire component right there. Great. Get that indentation right, clean it up, and that's it. We've just taken these two select fields and popped them out of the form tag and into this Livewire component. And again, reminder to everybody that if we take a look at this, we have still a form tag and then a div that Livewire owns, but we still have the select dropdowns and input. So to the browser, it's just a form submission. We don't have to change anything about that. All right, we're doing really well. Let's get back to this class. Cool. So what we want to do, I think our first little mission here should be let's hide this field completely before we select a language. So if we're not selecting a language, we're only seeing this dropdown. And this is a pattern that I guarantee you've seen a bunch. If you go to create a server in Forge, like here's a dropdown. I click something else shows up. If I change this to web server, more stuff changes. Conditional selects are like a ubiquitous UI pattern. I guarantee you've had to build them. I was trying to find ubiquitous small UI patterns. And so I tweeted out like, oh, I came across this one just thinking about it. And I tweeted out like, when's the last time that you did something like this in an app? And it just, people flooded it like 5 minutes ago. Like I do this all the time. Cars and makes and models and categories and types. And this is just such a common pattern. So let's see what Livewire can do. So back in the code, we need Livewire to know about the value of this select dropdown so that when we select something, we can perform some sort of conditional here that conditionally loads it if true or if false. So to do that with Livewire, we're going to use wire::model. Wire model is part of the Livewire API, which basically says, hey, whatever value is currently set on this input, bind it to a public property on the class. So let's create a public property. This is going to be called server language ID. Set it to an empty string by default. Okay. So server language ID and then wire model to server language ID. And to show you that this is all live and wired like, let's echo that out. Server language ID. Cool. So language : okay. So now we refresh, we have language and it's empty because it's an empty string for starters. Then we're going to select PHP and bam, we have 1. That's the ID of PHP. We select node and now we have 2. Perfect. So this is easy peasy. This is now a meaningful value and we can just write the blade that we want to accomplish our task. So this whole select, let's wrap it in a normal blade if statement. We'll say if selected language server ID, sorry, what am I saying? Server language ID I probably rehearsed this 1,000 times and should have called it selected language ID, whatever. Okay. So if server language ID, here we go. There we go. It disappeared because it's empty by default. So this blade if isn't going to get hit. Cool. Now we select something like PHP and now we get that list. Awesome. So step one done. The next thing we want to do is when we select one of these, we want to filter out these results. And again, easy peasy, we have access to this variable in Blade that has the ID of the language. So instead of getting framework : all from the database, let's do where language ID, paste it right in there, add a get, and this is just eloquent. And both literally and figuratively, folks. So PHP, and there we go. There's all the PHP frameworks and Node, and there's all the Node frameworks. And if we select one of these, select PHP, it resets itself. Super clean, super tight. That's that. Let's see if there's any more improvements we can make. One improvement that I want to make is we have 2 files for this, which feels a little weird. Like this file just doesn't seem like it's pulling its weight. And there's not a ton of HTML here. So a little trick, and this is the same for Blade components as well. Livewire components, you in the render method, you can just return a plain string of Blade. So let's do that. We're going to say return, and we'll use PHP's heredoc syntax to return just a string of all this Blade. So we'll cut this out, paste it in, we'll get our indentation right, clean it up. Okay. Great. So now the Blade is all in line there. We can basically kill this file completely. So let's kill that file. It's all in one file. We refresh and we're good to go. We have our interactivity. We can select our thing and we can say laraconyo.com. And this is, oh, we can't make it Symfony, Laravel. We add it and there's laraconyo.com. Cool. So that's magic trick number 1, how you can use Livewire for conditional selects. You can apply that same principle to all sorts of different form input dynamic things inside of a form. There's maybe you want real-time validation for one field, but you don't want to use Livewire for the entire form, which by the way, Livewire is great at handling forms themselves, but that's not what we're here for today. So there's lots of ways that you can use that: conditional selects, chain selects, all sorts of cool stuff. So dig it. All right. The next thing we're going to do is handle this restart button. So restart right now, when we click it, reminder, it's pretty lame. We don't get any real user feedback. It takes a bit to load to restart. It's a full form submission. We can do better. I feel like this is something that should be inline and reactive. So we're going to take this button and we're going to turn it into a Livewire component. So let's do that. Let's get to that Blade. Back to our routes file. This is on the dashboard now. So let's go into the dashboard and we're just grabbing all the servers from the database and popping them into the Blade view. So go into the dashboard Blade file and here's servers as server. And we're looping through, basically we have a UL and we're looping through all the servers for all these list items. So there they are. And then we're putting the server name right here. That's what you see. And then we have our fancy dancy restart form button right here. And then an add server button that we don't care about. All right, so let's do that thing again where we take a bunch of HTML and we shove it into a Livewire component. So Livewire, and this is going to be restart server button. Cool. And let's go ahead and create that. Artisan make Livewire restart server button. Restart server button. Now, if I hit enter, it's going to create 2 files. It's going to create a class and a Blade view just like before. But remember how we were like, oh, this doesn't feel like it's pulling its weight. There's too many files. Let's reduce the amount of files and return a string. Well, we can do that right away with this -- inline modifier when you're creating a Livewire component. So if we say that, now when we open up a restart server button, we have that boilerplate all set up for us with the here doc. So quick validation here, throw in some mumbo jumbo, and there it is. It loads up just like that. So let's take this HTML and pop it in here. Okay, cool. So now we have this HTML in here and everything seems like we should be able to reload it and still get green, like everything should be fine. We reload it and we have an error. Undefined variable $server, and there it is. So in our Blade template, we're using this server variable, but it doesn't actually exist. And this is because Livewire components can't access the scope around them. It's the same thing with Blade components. So we need to actually explicitly pass server into the component like this. Okay, so that's the syntax to pass a parameter into a component. And now we can receive that in our mount method. So server this server equals server. I'm going to type server like 1,000 times. So just prepare yourselves. Server, it'd probably be nice if I didn't say it every single time, but I will. Okay, so we have server as a public property, and we're pulling server in through the mount method because we're passing it in. That's where it's coming through. We're setting it as a property on this component. And now we're going to refresh, see what happens. Cool. We're still green. Everything works really well. Great. One tip. Here's a little hot tip nugget for you if you didn't know this already. In Livewire, you probably heard me say is like death to boilerplate. I just can't stand boilerplate. So part of the design philosophy of Livewire is like, if we can avoid, lines of code that are repetitive and ceremonious and unnecessary, then we should. And so you can actually remove this mount method completely because it's not doing anything interesting. Livewire is smart enough to intuit that you have a public property for a server and you're passing a server in. So we can get rid of that, refresh, and it totally still works. Great. Awesome. So let's see, what else can we do here? This is all isolated inside the server button thing. We want to actually wire this up so that Livewire is handling the restarting, not that form submission. So we could actually just remove this action and method, but I have another little banger for you later, so I'm not going to remove this just yet. But what we want to do is listen for a click on this button while the page is loaded and live and do some PHP stuff. So let's add that wire click. This is another thing in Livewire. You can say wire colon, and actually any browser event. It could be click, could be mouse enter, could be whatever you want. So we're going to do wire click, and we're going to say, this is where you pass in a method to call. So our method is going to be restart. Let's add that method right here. And for now, we're just going to dd, hey, Laracon, yo, y'all, okay? And now we hit restart, and there we go. Hey, Laracon, yo, y'all. But what happened there? It actually submitted the form as well. So I clicked this, it worked, but now the form got submitted because we clicked on the button and it bubbled up to the form. So one way to prevent that is to use .prevent, which is the equivalent of prevent default that you're probably familiar with browser events. So wireclick.prevent restart. And so this is going to basically, Livewire is going to handle that restart, and then it's not going to let the browser do anything. So let's try that again. Restart, and now that's right there, and we're good to go. Awesome. So wireclick.prevent restart. We showed that. Awesome. And so right now we're DDing this hey Laracon yo y'all. We can do a little bit better than that. So let's go into our routes file and actually look at restart server. So where's that? Restart server right here. And this is the code. Super duper simple because it's a demo. Server arrow restart. So let's do this arrow server arrow restart. And I'm just going to flash you this method to show you what it actually is. It's just a sleep of 2. That's it. So I'm just pretending to restart a server, but sleeping for 2 seconds to kind of demonstrate what a server restart might take, whatever. So now we're running actual PHP code. We have our Livewire all set up. Let's see how we did. Here we go. Restart. Ta-da. Something happened, but we don't actually know if anything happened. There's no UI anything to signal to the user that something happened. And if we take a look in our network requests and we hit restart, a network request does get sent, takes that 2 seconds, and then it comes back. So it worked. We did do the restarting, but the user has no idea. So here's a tip. I try to not listen for clicks on buttons, but rather listen for submissions on forms, even if it's for a single button. I try not to leave dangling buttons around my app because forms, things like buttons actually belong inside forms for accessibility reasons like screen readers, and also for keyboard usability reasons so that you can just hit enter and such and that. So this is kind of a smell to me. I try not to do this sort of thing. So let's get rid of that. Pop it in right there. And instead of listening for click on the form, we're going to listen to submit. So if the submit event happens on that form, and it could be triggered by anything inside the form, we're going to prevent default because we still don't want to actually submit the form. We're preventing default. We're calling restart. And now we should be better off. And let's see if we got any other goodies along the way. So I hit restart, and there we go. Everything's working. And notice something else that happened. Automatically, Livewire knows if it's listening for a submit event, it's going to automatically scour the form tag for any input elements and button elements. It's going to disable button elements and mark inputs as read only, which is an incredibly helpful bit of like, it's just a chore that you have to do that by yourself. So Livewire just takes care of it. So now a user can't hammer that restart button. It's not going to submit a bunch of requests, in succession. And it also acts as a loading indicator. It's perfect. You don't actually need a loading indicator sometimes. Maybe this is enough. And I think it is enough in a lot of cases. It signals to the user that something is going on, and it also signals that something is done going on. But we can do better than that, and Livewire makes it really easy to do better than that. So let's add ourselves a little bit of a loading state. So here we have this icon, X icon refresh, and then we have restart right here. So let's add a span, and we're going to add restarting, okay? Refresh, there's restarting, but we only want to show restarting, the ing part, when a network request is out to the server. So to do that, we're going to add wire::loading. And so this is Livewire's API for basically, if you attach this attribute to any element, it's going to hide that element by default with CSS, and it's going to show it to you when there's a network request out to the server. So if we refresh, we don't see restarting. We hit restart, and there we go. We see restarting, and it's all instant. It's perfectly instant. Okay, we can do one better also, this refresh icon. Let's spin it. And I just actually found out, like embarrassingly not long ago, that Tailwind has a whole utility suite for animations. So let's add a Tailwind class to make it spin. If we do class animate spin and refresh, there we go. We get that spin. So here's what you can do to toggle classes with wire loading. Wire loading supports toggling an element like you saw, also toggling classes, and also toggling attributes. So we can do wire::loading.class, refresh. It's not spinning, and now we click it, and now it is spinning, and we are ready to rumble. Cool. So how much better is that? Everything concerned with restarting a server is encapsulated into a single file. The blade, the loading animations, the behavior of it, the actual PHP code is all isolated into a single file, which I think is totally awesome. So one more thing I want to show you along these lines. Remember how I left in the action in the method? So we still have the old school behavior where you can still submit that form manually. And for some people, this is a really cool way of using Livewire. If you're into this fancy word, graceful degradation, which is basically if you want to support browsers who are worse than yours, you want things to degrade gracefully rather than just the entire app is broken. You might want the app to still work, maybe just not as nicely for somebody who doesn't have the fancy dancy stuff that you do. So if we actually disable JavaScript for this browser, so totally disable JavaScript doesn't even work right now, and refresh the page, Livewire is totally broken. There's no Livewire JavaScript or CSS working at all. But notice one, the whole page still loads perfectly, because remember, Livewire is just Blade until you do something live. So there's no difference in the startup. And then also, because we're not listening for that form submission to then do all our Livewire stuff, because Livewire is, again, broken, we hit restart, and it just falls back to the old behavior. So there's so many areas that you can use Livewire to augment your HTML. It doesn't have to own your HTML. It doesn't have to own a whole part of your app. It can just augment parts of it if you're into that sort of thing, which honestly, I am not into that sort of thing. I've never really written an app that supports not having JavaScript, so that's me. Cool. So again, we're isolating that all into a single button, and it looks great. So a reminder here that this is one of my favorite ways to use Livewire. Probably my favorite way to use Livewire, because it's so simple and small and atomic and encapsulated and whatever. And I actually see this quite a lot. In fact, the only place that I use Livewire on the actual Livewire docs is this button right here, become a sponsor to explore the code. This button, it handles becoming a sponsor. It handles sending the invite to GitHub, to the Surge repository. It handles all this stuff, and it's just one tag for one button and handles it all by itself. Another place that I've seen this used in the wild is on Spotsy's tutorial stuff. This mark is completed. That's a Livewire button. Like literally, take a look. There it is, wire::click. and then wire : ID. So they're using Livewire for this single button. It's such a nice use case. So let me say again, and really emphasize this, if you don't want to use Livewire, if you don't want to buy into some technology for your entire front end that's not just HTML and CSS, I recommend or encourage you to not be scared to use it for one single button, and that's enough. It's plenty of value, and it's very simple to get going. Cool. So let's keep going here. We've solved problem number 1 and problem number 2, and now let's tackle 3 and 4. So again, we're loading this page super slow because I added a sleep in PHP, but let's just pretend that this database query to get these visits is really expensive. So what we want to do is defer the loading of this chart until after we load the page so that we can take that database query out of the path of execution until the page is already loaded and the user can already interact with stuff. So we're going to use Livewire to do that. Let's dig into the code. So where are we? We're on the show server page. So this is server/server ID, matches the route. Cool. We grab the server out of the database, and then we do something here. We're saying server arrow visits for chart. This is a little method that I made that just kind of scours the database, grabs some stuff, and there's that sleep one right there, and spits out a tuple. This is a fun little note. I think it's a fun, often overlooked data structure in PHP. When there's two values that generally travel together, you can return them as basically two items in an array. Whoops, you don't even need to name the keys or anything. Just send out an array with two values and destructure them with PHP, which looks really nice. So little fun note there. But we're grabbing labels and we're grabbing values. So the labels being these at the bottom and the values being these on the side. And we're passing those into the blade view. And then we're also passing in the server to the blade view. So that's all that's going on inside the route. Let's dig into that blade view. Server.blade.php. Super duper simple. We have an H1 tag up here with the server name. There it is, bada bing. Then we have a figure element here with our X chart. This is a blade component that I concocted for to use chart.js to load a chart. And all it accepts is labels and values. Then we have the deploy button, which we'll get to in a bit. But this labels and values, just to make it uber clear what we're dealing with here, because I sort of thought for a second, like, I've done charts before and I'm always kind of confused as to where to do the database logic, what the API is for the reusable chart component. And I feel like I settled on something that's pretty good. So I'll at least show you as a tip, because in future apps for me, I think every app I'm probably going to work on in the future is going to have an X chart component that accepts labels and values. I'll flash this to you just so you can be overwhelmed. This is all the chart.js code that it takes to just create a simple chart, which is a little bit silliness, but once you get it done, it's set, good to go. If you're dying for that code, hit me up on Twitter and I can send you like a GitHub gist. So the labels and the values that we're passing in, just to demonstrate this, it's just an array of labels. So foo, bar, basil, lazzle, okay. And then values, we'll do 5, 10, and 1. Great. These values have to match up with the labels, refresh, and it's still going to take a bit, but there we go. We have 5, 10, and 1, foo, bar, basil. So it's very simple. All we're passing in is plain data. I just wanted to show you that so that you have context and you don't get too lost with just random, hidden black box variables. Great. So this chunk, again, we want to yank this out into a separate Livewire component. So Livewire : and this is going to be, let's see, server visits chart. Cool. And we know we're going to have to pass in the server because that's what we do now. So I'm just going to do that right now. Cool. All right. Server visits chart, artisan, make Livewire server visits chart. We want that to be in line. Server visits chart. Here's that component with our render method right there. So let's grab this HTML, yank it out, and pop it in right here. Cool. Okay. So now Livewire owns this chunk. But if we take a look at this, it's using labels and values, which again, remember, we don't inherit scope from outside. So we're definitely going to get an error, undefined variable labels or values, one of those. So let's just see it. Undefined variable labels. There it is. It's going to show us our blade view labels. It's undefined. So we need some property called public labels. Oops. And we also need one for values. And remember, we also passed in the server, so let's define that up here. Great, so now we need values and labels. Now remember, before we were doing this work inside of the routes file. So inside this routes file, we're getting the labels and values from the server model itself. So we need to move this logic into here somewhere. So this is the first we're going to see. Oh, actually not the first we're going to see of the mount method. This is the method that gets run when a component is initialized in the initial loading of the page. So we can take all this stuff, and this isn't where it's going to end up, but I'm just trying to get to green. I'm trying to pull everything in and get us back to working before the magic tricks come out. So this arrow server, arrow visits for chart. We populate this arrow labels and this arrow values. So now those two variables should be defined. And now the blade view has it. And again, we didn't actually do anything crazy here. We just got ourselves back to green. So refresh. Oh, we're actually going to get a new error because labels and values don't exist. So let's do that. Refresh. And it might have actually worked. I don't know why that worked. So here we go. We're back to green. We still have that slow page. Now it's time to solve the problem. We want to take this bit of code because it's slow, because I manually put a sleep in there, and because you may have a slow database query, and I want to remove it from the initial execution path. So let's rename this to something bespoke, like load chart data. Okay, now that we've done that, it's not a mount method. Nothing's calling it. It basically doesn't exist. It's as if I just deleted it. So refresh. Cool. Page is loading instantly, and nothing is happening here. So let's trigger this somehow. Let's do something manual, like add a button called load, wire click, load chart data. Load chart data. Okay, now nothing's happening. Let's look at our network tab here. We hit load, we fire off that AJAX request. It takes that second to load it all, and then it shows up. Awesome. So this is better, but obviously this is ridiculous. We're not going to have a load button for the user to load the chart. We want to load it as soon as the page loads. So how do we do that? How do we trigger a load? There's 100 different ways you can do it, but Livewire provides a nice little helper utility called wire init. And wire init is like wire click, except when the page initializes. So we can call load chart data from wire init, delete that wire click, and we can actually delete that button altogether. And let's zoom in here so that we have nice, full, giant context. We added wire init to load chart data. And now let's refresh the page, loads instantly. After 1 second of time, it then shows up all the data right there. So that's the work. That's really, it's incredibly simple, but it's actually a really powerful feature because if there's, lots of whiz bangs and doodads and charts and things on your page that are expensive to load, but aren't critical for the first, path of using your app, you can very easily defer those loadings. But this looks pretty horrible. We want a loading spinner. So you do whatever you want here. You could have a loading spinner, an SVG. You could concoct anything you want. For me, I have my own little chart -loading that I threw together in Sketch. Doesn't look too bad, but a little bad. And that's what I got. So we're going to show this until we call that data and it's available. And then we'll show the other one. Super not hard to do because we're just using Blade. So we're going to say if labels and values. So if those two things exist, then load the chart. Else, use that chart loading. And if, cool. So the first path of execution, labels and values is null. So we're going to see that chart loading. And then as soon as the page loads, that AJAX request goes out, we call load chart data. And then we store the labels and values. And now we're going to see it actually in the chart. So here we go. Let's see it work. We load the page, we get that loading indicator. I'll show that to you again. Loading indicator. And 1 second later, we see our chart. Super nice, super tight. Didn't take a ton of work. Pretty cool. All right, so that's that. There's another little magic trick that I want to show you. Let's say that you want to make this chart live. So something like visits are constantly coming in. You want to show the user an updated graph while they're on this page because maybe they leave this page open for a long time. So there's a few different ways you can do that in an app, but a really, really easy way with Livewire is using wire::poll, which taps into the feature of polling in Livewire, which is basically instead of running a method at one time when an event is fired or when we init, wire::poll allows us to fire a method on an interval. Okay, so wire pull, load chart data. And now check this out. We're not going to notice any difference visually right now, but take a look at these network requests. We're now firing one off every 2.5 seconds. I think that's the default for Livewire. And so it's actually refreshing itself. Every 2.5 seconds, it's reloading that chart data. So let's take a look at that in action. I created a little console command that we can run. So let's get that. Artisan, Laracon, add visits. And let me pull this up. Can you see this thing? Oh, we got to get this going here. Okay, here we go. Here we go. So as soon as I hit add visits, I'm just going to add visits to the database. And with any luck, this chart's just going to update. There it is. It updated. We can do it again, and we could do it again. And every time new data comes in, that chart is going to be refreshing in the background, and it'll update when it has new updated data, which I think is pretty cool. So that's great. And polling is an incredibly powerful feature. It allows you to get all the real-time reactivity of something that you might think you need, like WebSockets and Pusher and Laravel Echo, which are all great tools. But sometimes polling does the trick for you, and it's extremely simple. And because it's just using AJAX requests, it doesn't actually require any more infrastructure or anything like that. So polling is great. But here's the big con of polling. Here's why it doesn't always make sense to use polling. In our instance, we're hitting the server every 2.5 seconds. That's a lot of server hits. I think we could do better than that. So here's the golden rule of using wire colon poll or any sort of polling. Poll as slow as you possibly can for the feature that you're building. So think about what is the maximum amount of time that I can set for that polling to make this feature still valuable to the user. So in this case, a chart like this, let's say I expect to maybe see new data every maybe 10 seconds, 30 seconds. So you can customize that with dot and then the number of seconds. We're going to do 5 seconds so I don't have to sit here and wait for 20 seconds. Okay, so we load the chart, and now 5 seconds later, we're going to pull the server. And then another 5 seconds, we're going to pull the server. So I highly recommend use polling in your apps, and then upgrade to something like Laravel Echo only as you need to. Start with polling because generally, so I recently created an app for Disney Trivia Night for my wife and her friends. And I used polling to start, and the performance started to get pretty bad as it got more popular. And I thought, oh man, like this app is garbage because I'm using polling. I got to upgrade to Echo and Pusher, and I did. And it didn't get any faster. I realized I just had slow database queries. So usually the performance issues you're going to run into first are not polling. But when you do, you can easily upgrade to something like Laravel Echo. I want to remind you here that Livewire supports Echo out of the box, and it's incredibly easy to make Echo call load chart data. I'll leave that up to you in the docs. It's kind of out of the scope of this talk, but just so you know that. Okay, great. So I think we've done pretty well for ourselves here. We've deferred the loading of a chart. Feel free to use this feature to defer the loading of all sorts of stuff: data tables, lists, charts, notification icons, all sorts of stuff. All right, so that's third one down. The fourth and final thing we want to tackle here is this deploy button. So right now, when we hit deploy, it's a full form submission. Now, deployment is basically, I'm using it right here to represent something that might kick off a queued job, whether that's generating a spreadsheet export or deploying a server. Like when you do that on Forge, it takes, I don't know, 15 seconds or something. And then show the user that the thing is done deploying. That's what we want to do. So it's not just as simple as wire loading anymore. We're actually dealing with queued jobs. So let's dig into the code and tackle this deploy thing. Okay, so deploy server. The deploy server button is on the serverblade.php file right here. We have this form tag and then this deploy button. So let's extract it out into a separate component, Livewire, and this is going to be deploy server button, butto. And of course, like always, we're going to pass in the server. Cool. All right, we're going to grab that name, artisan make Livewire. Oh no, I just did it. I created it without doing that inline. And I'll just take this opportunity to demo some parts of Livewire that people might forget exist. So Livewire actually has Livewire:make, which you saw me do make Livewire because that's just intuitive. It actually supports both. Livewire make, there's copy, there's move, and then there's destroy, I think, or remove. Honestly, I don't remember what the command is because you're like, how do you delete the component you just created? Is it delete? Is it remove? Is it destroy? I don't know. So I thought, like, what's a good reliable mapping so that I don't have to look up what the word is for creating or making or, or moving or copying. So I thought, well, I know the the console command, like bash commands for those things. Like touch is creating in bash, rm is remove, mv is move, and cp is copy. So I thought, why don't I just offer those as aliases? So you can do that. And I actually use them pretty often because I never remember which one is actually remove. In fact, I wrote the thing and I can't even tell you what remove is. So we're just going to use rm to undo what we just did. It's like, hey, do you want to remove those things? Yes. Now let's go back and re-add it, but with our inline flag so that we're only creating that one file. So deploy server button. Great. Here's the file. We're going to take this HTML. We're going to pop it in. This is the same stuff you've been seeing so that now Livewire encapsulates this. And we're going to create our public server property right here so that everybody can see that. Awesome. And then if we refresh, we're still good. We're still green. We do have 2 deploy buttons though. Did I not save something? Yes, I did not save something. Cool. So we're back in action. Let's jump right to the chase. We're not going to leave this action and method thing dangling around anymore. We're going to cut right to the chase and listen for wire submit.prevent and call a method called deploy. Deploy. And then in here, we can dd yo. I'm really curious, like what you guys do for this. So I'm like a yoer, and then like a hey there, like maybe sometimes foobar, but that would be kind of an interesting thing. So maybe like tweet out what you use when you're just typing stuff to see code get executed. But I'm a yo guy. I'm also a yo. That's true as well. So we're going to hit deploy. It's going to hit this form wire submit.prevent and call this deploy method and dd yo. So watch this. There I am. I'm a yo. Cool. So instead of that dd, let's put in something meaningful. This server deploy. Now I'm going to flash to you what this server deploy method does. Don't take it upon yourself to understand every line of code here. My intention is not to overwhelm you, just to give you some context. We'll come up for air in a second. It's really simple though. Here's a method on the server model where I update a database field to is deploying to true. And then I dispatch a job called deploy where I pass in the server. And then inside of there, I sleep for 4 seconds to pretend that I'm actually deploying something. And then I update is deploying to false. Cool. We're back for air. This is going to kick off a job. So because it's a job, we're going to need a queue runner or job worker, whatever. I can't think of the words. Artisan, queue, listen, or work, whatever you prefer. I don't know the difference because I don't use queues all that often, and I'm a total noob in that regard. So check this out. We have queue listen. I'm going to pop this up. Now, if I hit deploy, we're going to deploy that job, and let's take a look at what happens. Hit deploy, and something, oh, there we go. So it did happen there. So there it is, processing, app jobs deploy, processed. So there's our queued job going on. And just as a reminder to make this crystal clear, the difference between this and the restart button is that when we hit deploy, this thing happens in 20 milliseconds because it's just kicking off the queued job. You can actually see the button get disabled for just a tiny amount of time. In fact, if we change this to slow 3G, when we hit deploy, there we go. We get that disabled button. And all that does is kick off the job. It's not actually showing us that, the thing is out deploying. Okay, makes sense. We good? We're good. All right, so deploy. What we want to do is show deploying when we're actually deploying the thing. We want this to be disabled. And we can't just use wire loading because it's not just for the duration of a network request. It's for like a bespoke process in our system. So we're going to say if server is deploying, that's just a little helper thing that I made. Then see, now this is a case where if the server is deploying, we want to show the exception, but I don't like that. I like the happy path to be the first fork in a conditional. So we're going to use unless, which is the inverse of if in Blade. So I'm saying, and this reads really well to me, unless the server is deploying, then show the deploy button because that's the thing that matters. Otherwise, show the loading button, the deploying button. And I always end these as end if. You can use end unless, but most of these are just like abstractions on top of an if statement. So you can always just use end if. I don't know what to do. What should we do? We're going to do end if. Okay. So let's think through what's going to happen here now. What's going to happen is I'm going to click deploy on the front end because this is what loads first. It's going to fire off that queued job, and now deploying is going to show. So let's take a look at that. Deploy, and let's pop open this queue thing here, clear that out, hit deploy, and there we go. We have that user feedback. The job is deploying, but now notice that the job is done and we're still showing that deploying, because how does the front end know that something on the server was updated? Like we don't have any WebSocket setup going. We don't have any server sent events, situation going on. We just have a primitive, Laravel app. So what we can do, of course, like you just saw, we can add wire : pull, which is going to pull the server every 2.5 seconds. So here we go. We're pulling the server. Now I'm going to hit deploy. Now, like 4 seconds later, it should shut off when it's done deploying because we're pulling that server. And there we go. It totally does. So you'd think that we might be done here, or actually not. I hate this. I hate that feature. I don't think I would do it that way because look at how many requests we're wasting. Like how often does the user hit that deploy button on this page? Really? It just seems like incredibly wasteful. It doesn't seem that wasteful to me up here because this is data that's constantly coming in. Wire pulling makes sense. But down here, it's not. It's like we're just going to wait around taxing your server just for a user to click something. Not cool. So here's a magic trick. I'm telling you, I've been told by some people who've seen this talk that this is like the drop of the talk. And people are like, make sure that you emphasize that point because that's actually kind of a money feature. So get ready, get your cameras out. Here comes the big feature. Wire pull. Livewire will only pull when wire pull exists in the template. So you can actually wrap it in a conditional and conditionally wire pull. And we don't even have to do anything like that. We can just toss it on this button here. And now only when the loading state is showing is Livewire going to actually be pulling. And then when the loading state stops, the polling stops. So get ready. We restarted the page. We refreshed it. We have 0 AJAX requests. We're chilling. We're not texting our server unnecessarily. I'm going to hit deploy. Bam. The job gets queued. It's out there. Now Livewire is pulling the server. It's going, hey, are you done? Are you done? Hey, you're done. And now it stops pulling. We haven't wasted any requests. We're not sitting there taxing the server. So conditional polling is it's like a power pattern for anything like this, for generating and exported CSV. You could imagine how easily you could store the process or like the progress of a deployment in the database and actually like pull and show progress as the deployment continues or the export generator continues or whatever it is. So that's pretty cool. I hope you think that's pretty cool because I totally do. And that's that. So let's assess the situation. Let's see how far we've come. We've taken a very staticky app. We've made it a lot faster and more interactive. So we add a server, and there we go. We have this reactive conditional select where we can select stuff, FDA.com. I do FDA all the time too. And I just realized that that's the Food and Drug Administration. Create. Okay, now we have FDA.com. We go in, missed the restart. We have these really cool restart buttons and they can handle themselves. They're all atomic. This is Livewire, folks. We click into Composer, what is wrong with me? CalebPorzio.com, okay? And we have that deferred loading goodness. We get the page right away. We're not slowing up and waiting around for Eloquent. We're showing those visits in a chart. We deferred the loading of that. We got that really slick, cool loading indicator. Clearly he spent a lot of time on that. And then we hit deploy and we got that loading state with a queued job, conditional wire pulling. Yeah. So I feel like we've done a few cool things. This hopefully to you, what I want you to take away from this is Livewire can be used to augment your existing applications. You don't have to sell out your whole front end to Livewire, although you should. It's a really good idea. But if you don't, if you want to have a vanilla Laravel app and really lean into the traditional tools, all the power to you. Livewire it's gonna come in handy for those little interactions that you definitely need, and it's gonna allow you to stay in Blade Land and keep doing your thing. And that's the app. So I hope you dug it. I hope you took away a few little notes, a few little tools. Let's see what time we're at. Okay, we're at a really good time. Let me just close up here by selling you stuff. First thing I want to sell you is Make VS Code Awesome. This is a course I came out with last year because I do stuff like this and people go, hey, what is your theme? How did you get to do that? What's this shortcut key? Like, I'm guessing you probably saw, I'm tooting my own horn here, but you may have seen or may not have seen me do something with VS Code that you're like, oh, how did he just do that with his mouse? Well, I distilled it all into a course and I put a bunch of work into it to hopefully, make everybody really good at VS Code and make your VS Code awesome. So go to makevscodeawesome.com if you want to learn how to make VS Code awesome. I actually, like, just before this talk, I was like, if you're going to sell them something, at least give them a discount. So I put together like a coupon code. So if you go to makevscodeawesome.com and use Laracon as a coupon code, you get 25% off. And I'm going to drop that after, I think, an hour from now. I'm just going to leave it out there for an hour. I think 25% is the biggest discount that I've ever given. These are not the actual prices, actually. I put, you'll have to use the coupon code, So there you go. Hopefully you dig that. Enjoy that. The other thing I want to say is I didn't talk about Alpine, and Alpine's got a ton of cool stuff coming soon. I'm rewriting Alpine, and I've actually rewritten it. Alpine v3 is basically done, and I'm going to be souping it up. There's going to be a new docs site. We're going to launch Alpine v3, and there's going to be a bunch of cool new features and maybe a new course. So all that stuff is coming out, and if you want to be aware of stuff, and this goes for anything I do, if you want to be aware of stuff, go to LaravelLivewire.com and throw your email into this antiquated email box that I definitely need to update. Throw your email in there, hit subscribe, and you'll be on the big list that I have in ConvertKit to send people announcements. So as soon as I have stuff to say about Alpine, you're going to hear about it. Also Twitter, of course. Love Twitter, on it a lot. Big picture of me fly fishing. Follow me on Twitter if you want to hang out there. I'm always down to chat and chill. So that is my talk. I hope you dug it. Have a great day.
All right. Another killer talk. Great job.
Thanks, Ian.
That wire pull thing at the end.
Wire pull, man. Isn't that a money feature? Right?
It is a money feature.
It's nice.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I was pumped about that.
Yeah, really good stuff. All right, man. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Great job.
Yep. Thanks, Ian.